Leave Austria before 2026 and before it's too late. Today I'm going to break down some of Austria's biggest challenges and how you can escape one of the most rapidly collapsing countries of the 21st century. No matter who you talk to in Austria, one of the biggest issues surrounding the quality of life in the Central European country is now the cost of living. Since 2021, the cost of living in Austria has risen significantly, making the lives of middle-class Austrians much more difficult than it used to be. Electricity prices have skyrocketed throughout Austria. If we take a look at the current electricity prices of early 2025 and we compare the electricity prices to what we saw in April 2024, we can see a 36% increase in electricity prices year over year. We're talking from April 2024 to April 2025. That is an absolute staggering increase that Austrians have to face and deal with in this very century. The elevated electricity prices that middle-class Austrians have to deal with in the 21st century easily add up to 900 all the way to 2,000 euros annually. Of course, it depends on the size of the household, but it is not unheard of for an Austrian to be paying this kind of money in electricity prices on an annual basis. Since 2021, the cost of the average shopping basket has increased by more than 50%. A shopping basket used to be 51 euros, and we're talking about low quality, like very cheap foods, right? The average shopping basket used to be 51 euros, and now in this year, 2025, a middle-class Austrian can expect to pay as much as 78 euros on the average shopping basket to fill the average shopping basket. So we're looking at an over 50% increase in just a few short years. When walking down the streets of Vienna, Austria, you can see lots of dissatisfaction surrounding life in Austria. Everyday items that used to be affordable, and we're talking about basic necessities for life, food, right? Dining out has become a luxury activity for an average middle-class Austrian. It's no longer something an Austrian can take for granted. Nowadays, eating out is a luxury activity for a middle-class Austrian. Given the sharp rise in food prices, it is very easy to understand how eating out at restaurants has become very difficult, because obviously restaurants have to raise prices, and all of this is tied to some of the changes that we have seen over the past number of years. The increase in electricity prices, the increase in food prices, all of these increases make dining out or even just taking out food a lot more expensive in 2025. Now, having a look at Austria's housing market, we can see that there isn't a lot of good news to report here either. Like, just having a look at the national numbers, we can see that housing prices have increased by at least 4% nationwide. However, in Austria's capital, Vienna, residents have reported rent increases of up to 20%. Spending 150 euros monthly for moderate electricity consumption for a very small apartment in Vienna is not unheard of. In fact, oftentimes we hear stories and we see reports of much higher electricity bills from Vienna. The cost to buy a rail subway pass has also increased by 7.7% in just a year. Let's talk about another important point, and that is immigration. Austria has seen not so compatible immigration over the past number of years. It is estimated that 40% of Vienna's population is comprised of migrants. So we're talking about people who just recently immigrated to Vienna, Austria. And 50% have an migration background. So we're talking about one of their family members being of foreign origin. Many of Vienna's outer districts we're talking about Otterkring, Favoriten, and some other districts are now reporting 30 to 50% foreign residents. There's a new development happening throughout Austria's biggest metropolitan, Vienna, and that is the balkanization that residents have to deal with in 2025 and beyond. There seems to be a lack of cultural compatibility. That is something new that the residents and citizens of Vienna are facing. Once a city and once a country that used to be very culturally compatible is now facing migration from geographic locations that is just not very conducive to the establishment of a peaceful environment in 2025. There are many reports of violence. There are reports of lack of cultural assimilation, leading to the segmentation of different ethnicities throughout Austria's metropolitan Vienna. If we compare this current picture to the results Austria generated in the past century or centuries, a time where people immigrated to Austria and actually had the best of intentions to assimilate with the current population, the current people at the time living in Austria, we can see that now immigrants that come from other geographic locations, and those people are now referred to as the new Austrians, they now have a much harder time assimilating with prolonged Austrian values and traditions. So this naturally leads to a lot of local dissatisfaction and the segmentation of different cultural groups throughout Austria's major metropolitan Vienna. It even leads to the point where lots of activities that are considered to be going against the law are currently ignored by Austria's law enforcement agencies because they have much bigger challenges to deal with that are caused by migration from non-assimilating groups. And it's just a lot going on there that the average middle-class Austrian has a very difficult time agreeing with, adapting to, and understanding. And so there's just more and more dissatisfaction. Another important point is the cleanliness of Vienna's reputation is slowly fading away. Vienna used to be a city of cleanliness. It used to be a city of rule of law, of strong rule of law, but nowadays Vienna is a city in chaos. It has become a dumping ground for non-assimilating migrants that don't really have the same environmental understanding and lack, obviously, the education that's associated with maintaining strong rule of law. And so there's just a lot of problems happening within Austria's major metropolitan that upsets hardworking, law-abiding, and compliant Austrians. It's quite interesting to see how in schools and even neighborhoods, German seems to have become a secondary language, where in reality and on paper, German is the native language of Austria, but due to the recent increase in migrants from non-German speaking countries, we can see that the language ability is slowly declining throughout Austria. Not just the metropolitan, but throughout all major states, there seems to be a decline in ability to speak German. There have been numerous reports of Vienna splitting into culturally distinct neighborhoods and districts where people are extremely segmented within their own community, not wanting to go out there and actually assimilate with the Austrians. And the new Austrians that are creating the segmentation or these segmentations throughout Vienna's metropolitan, they don't seem to show any real willingness to make the efforts to actually embody the inherent Austrian values that the country stands for. Zombielands are also on the rise, and they are a very concerning fact of the current life situation in Vienna, Austria. There have been numerous incidents. The use of zombie-related activities has not only increased in certain neighborhoods and private areas, but even more so in public areas and even in public transportation systems throughout Vienna. We're talking about the subway, trains, buses. We can see that zombie-related activity is spreading rapidly throughout major districts in Vienna, creating a perception of an unsafe environment. Due to the lack of cultural assimilation screening and compliance with actual assimilation, there has been many reports of Austrian families pulling out their children from public schools in Austria and resorting to other methods of educating their children. Austrians have mixed opinions about the coexistence of certain cultural groups, and some reports have shown that 50% of people agree with the implementation of education for different cultural groups, whereas the other 50% don't agree with it because they don't think that it works. There's also a lack of taxes being accumulated from the new Austrians, because oftentimes there is immigration happening in Austria that leads to a lack of tax revenue collected, and that is specifically and especially true for businesses that are heavily reliant on cash and that are orchestrated by the new Austrians who originally migrated from geographic locations where the act of paying taxes is just less prominent. While it is true that the digitalization of transactions is leading to more tax revenue collected than before, due to the fact that everyday transactions are just more trackable, they are more visible, they are more apparent, many businesses in Austria are still very cash dependent businesses. They're fully cash operated businesses, and the businesses that generate their transactions by cash, that accept cash as a payment method, they obviously have sometimes less compliance to deal with, which leads to reduced taxes in Austria. It is quite shocking to see the incentives the Austrian authorities and leadership has put in place to attract migrants, not only to come into the Central European country, but also to remain in the country. But at the same time, the efforts and long-term contributions of Austrians who hold Austrian citizenship are often neglected, and benefits are given to migrants, sometimes also people that didn't exactly enter the country in the most lawful way. Those people are often benefited and preferred over Austrians that used to pay into the pot for years or even decades, naturally leading to a mass exodus of Austrians, of law-abiding Austrians, into other geographic locations where law-abiding Austrians just have a much better chance of survival and where they can reap the rewards of their labor much more consistently without paying into a pot that isn't really financed by everyone equally. I think the picture of Austrians leaving Austria is becoming clearer every day as Austrians realize they have much better options abroad. They have legal options abroad to minimize their taxes and to achieve a higher quality of life without witnessing how the majority of their income is being taken away from them without the authorities providing enough support, enough benefits for the contributions the law-abiding Austrians made. Austria is home to some of the highest progressive income tax rates in the 21st century. Austrians who earn more than 1 million euros a year would have to pay an income tax rate of 55% on income that exceeds 1 million euros. But it is true that regular income tax brackets in Austria range from 20 to 50%, which is a significant amount considering that Austria also applies a 20% value-added tax that applies to electronics and most non-essential items law-abiding Austrians need living in Austria in the 21st century. Austrians are also paying very high social contributions to stay compliant with Austrian law. 39% of the gross salary goes to pensions, healthcare, and unemployment. And some of these benefits law-abiding Austrians may not be able to use due to the lack of funding for these programs, yet they're paying these ultra-high tax rates to hopefully be able to reap the rewards at some point in the future. However, there is no guarantee offered, and we can see that this is very true given the current inflation rates and given the not so positive outlook of the Austrian economy. The impact this has on a middle class or even upper middle class Austrian is obviously less take-home pay, a smaller expectation of getting some of these benefits in the mid to long term, and this is all due to the lack of funding of these programs, and of course a decreased quality of life. Corporations aren't doing that much better either. Austria is home to one of the highest corporate tax rates throughout the entire European Union, and actually one of the countries with the highest corporate tax rates in the entire world. And so naturally this leads to Austrian corporations considering a setup in a different geographic location that is more conducive to retained earnings, because with retained earnings you have much better opportunities to expand your business and add more money to the employment sector, fund more venues for the business to grow. But if corporate taxes stay high, it makes it very challenging for a successful business to invest and grow. Now that we have addressed some of Austria's biggest challenges, what should middle-class Austrians do to preserve their purchasing power in the 21st century? What should middle-class Austrians do to ensure their quality of life will not decrease further in this century? Now, there are a couple of things that Austrians can consider, and by the way, the recommendations I'm about to give you inside this video don't just apply to middle class and upper middle class Austrians. These highly recommended tips I'm about to reveal in the next minutes, they are very much applicable to middle class people worldwide, including Americans, Canadians, and Europeans from other nations that are part of the European Union. There are several tax-friendly countries that Europeans, Americans, and Canadians can consider moving to assure their quality of life is guaranteed in the 21st century, and these countries are Paraguay, Panama, Uruguay, and also Argentina. Paraguay is home to one of the most fantastic tax systems worldwide. It is called the territorial tax system that enables hard-working Austrians with a location-independent income or even a pension from the Austrian government to relocate to Paraguay and not have to pay taxes on the income they generated abroad. Let's say you have businesses abroad and you have the money generated abroad, you don't bring the money into Paraguay, that money would not be taxed in the country of Paraguay. Locally generated income is taxed anywhere from 1 to 10% max, making Paraguay one of the most tax-friendly destinations in this century. Now imagine how much you can save if taxes are kept low and if taxes on foreign income are not applied. I mean, your take-home pay is so much more, enabling you to stretch your living standard to the level you want it to be. So Paraguay is a fantastic destination not only for Austrians but Europeans, Americans, and Canadians alike. And Paraguay allows you to obtain a residency without the need of proving economic solvency. You can immigrate to Paraguay by showing a clean criminal record certificate from the Austrian Law Enforcement Agency, and you can move from Austria to Paraguay or from Europe to Paraguay or North America to Paraguay pretty much anytime you want, assuming you have a clean criminal record. Paraguay has a successful history of immigration and of integrating people into their country. So unlike the lack of cultural assimilation that's implemented in the Central European country, Paraguay is a Catholic country, making it an ideal destination for a Central European, Northern European, a Brit, American, or Canadian. Balkanization is currently not present in Paraguay. By moving to Paraguay, you can drastically increase your quality of life for 3 main reasons. Paraguay is self-sufficient in many ways. Paraguay has its own electricity. It's one of the largest producers of hydroelectric energy in the entire world. 100% of Paraguay's energy comes from hydroelectric energy, which is generated from within Paraguay's borders, making it one of the most affordable energy sources in the 21st century. Likewise, Paraguay is very strong at agriculture. It is one of the biggest exporters of beef in the entire world. Electricity, food, and water are three of the most important necessities a middle-class person has to meet living in this very century, and Paraguay offers it all at a fraction of the cost that you would have to pay in your native country. Panama is another country that is interesting. It offers a similar tax system to Paraguay. It's also home to the territorial tax system that allows Europeans to not pay taxes on foreign sourced income. And also money that you bring in from abroad into a local account or into a corporate account in Panama would not be taxed in Panama because it is considered foreign sourced income. Some exceptions may apply to this rule, but as a rule of thumb, foreign sourced income remains tax-free in Panama. Europeans, Americans, and Canadians can greatly benefit from Panama's Friendly Nations visa program that has been open for many years and has welcomed immigrants from many countries and has given them full reciprocity in civil and property rights. To qualify for Panama's Friendly Nations visa program, you can incorporate a business, sponsor yourself, get a residency, and comply with all laws that you have to meet to be able to convert from temporary to permanent residency within a small time window before your temporary residency expires. Once you have Panamanian permanent residency, it is for life. You still have to renew your national ID cards, but it is a very secure and stable permanent residency that is available to Austrians, Europeans, Americans, and Canadians. Uruguay is another interesting, very European country located in South America that offers an 11-year tax exemption to Austrians, Europeans, Americans, and Canadians. When Uruguay grants you the 11-year tax exemption, income that you bring from abroad into Uruguay would not be taxed under this tax exemption. If you have a pension, social security, rental income, or other foreign sourced income, you may qualify for Uruguay's residency program. Uruguay offers one of the most politically stable environments to live in, and it's also one of the safest countries in whole Latin America. Like Paraguay, Uruguay has an immigrant history and it feels very much like Europe. Walking down the streets of Montevideo can be very comparable to walking down the streets of many major European metropolitans without the issues related to cultural assimilation, Zombielands, among other issues Europeans face living in major European metropolitans. If you're interested in departing Austria, Europe, United States, Canada, or Australia, please book a consultation with me today. Go to nomadelite.com and click on book a consultation. I look forward to talking with you and advising you on the best residency programs in 2025. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your attendance and I look forward to welcoming you to Latin America.